To the February LPC meeting. I hope everyone's pipes are feeling warm, and I hear a lot of people talking about weather and stuff like that. We're really glad you're here.
Or now.
Yes, that's true. Oh.
Saturday, they were running.
Oh dear. It was some pretty intensive weather, so welcome everyone. To kick it off, we are live on the GoToMeeting. I'm working, if I'm a little distracted for the beginning here, our internet here in Town Hall is a little bit slow, at least on my computer, so I'm going to see if I can project off this. If not, I have my hotspot to flip off over to, but that's what I'm going to. But the first thing on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the January meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes?
I second it.
Yes, we did get a second, and we had
Yeah, she
for
just
discussion.
wanted to know.
Excellent. So the first thing, besides approving the minutes, which thank you, Barbara, for doing the minutes. We're really grateful for you for that service. Thank you. Is to get an update on the Harwich Housing Huddle that went last Wednesday at 8:30 in the morning at the 204. I think several of our members went, so please tell us all about it.
No, you please.
Was it just two of us that were there? There was.
I think
I know
Pete
Pete was
went.
there.
Yep.
I was there.
Nice. Cool. A lot of people. Tell us about it.
Big rep.
I mean, I'll just, opening comments, but I was really, I shouldn't say completely shocked, but it was surprising to see how sharply pained the situation has become since the pandemic, especially as the folks who sat in the panel got up and spoke about the educational impacts, the teachers, the administrators, the chief of the fire department, Chief LeBlanc spoke and talked about not so much an impact there, but because of the ways they actually back each other up, but it could become an impact shortly, and it has been an impact with other towns that he knows of. It just profoundly has become an impact in just the last couple of years, faster than most people, I think, have appreciated it. And I think it's of absolute dire need. I think I walked away from that meeting appreciating just how dire the situation was. That was my takeaway.
Please.
I too, I agree with what you said, Brian, because it was, I guess what really bothered me or what really struck home is when the superintendent got up and said that, they had to go to candidate number 8
Right.
before 1 through 7, because they couldn't find housing, suitable housing or affordable housing or any kind of housing.
A place to live. Yes.
And if you figure at the amount of money that teachers are getting paid or accountants or whatever they have up there, and then you think about the people that are at the grocery store and at the restaurants and everything, is like, can anybody afford anything out there? The only thing that I felt, and I'll probably, leave it, whatever. I thought the elephant in the room that was not discussed, though, was the fact that the town is allowing all these McMansions to be built on what used to be affordable housing size lots and houses. They come in, tear them down, be they historic or non-historic, and all of a sudden we have a house that covers the lot to the maximum extent allowable. And, let's face it, 99.9% of the people that live on the Cape will never be able to afford a house that they're building now, and it's happening more and more. And realistically, because of the pandemic, you had people coming down that had houses or rented houses, and now it's such a hot spot, the Cape as a whole and other locations, to buy a vacation home and put it on Vrbo and Airbnb, to the point of where they're renting it out and taking it off what could have been an affordable house for a teacher or an accountant or something like that. And that was not talked about, the fact that the town, and not just Harwich, all the towns are allowing this to happen, and I don't think there's any ramification for it other than the fact that we're losing housing stock, affordable or semi-affordable housing stock at an increased rate with all of this.
It might be some of our work. But, and there's some data, hopefully towards the end of the meeting that we get into. Jeff?
So I think it was a good turnout. I think there
I
was-
heard it was robust. I was 8:30 in the morning on a Wednesday. Yeah.
I think it's important to mention that there's another one happening in March at 5:30. I think because of you, Bernadette.
Well, no, I asked.
It makes
yeah.
sense, right? I think to see.
Your target audience is the
Yeah.
people that were all out working and couldn't take their
No, of course.
time away
And
from their work.
I
yeah.
was thrilled to hear that there was a sentiment to have another follow-up to this at 5:30 where mere
Right.
mortals are able to attend.
Yeah.
It did strike me that now medical professionals have
Oh,
been
yeah. Yep.
affected. So 5-10 years ago, it was our teachers, the town employees, they're struggling. But now when Outer Cape Health can't get medical professionals.
primary
which
care
yeah,
providers,
primary
right,
care.
yeah.
I mean, it becomes, so what scares me about that is it's not just staying put. It's actually graduating and growing in what I would consider to be trouble. To take away that, my takeaway is that zoning from years ago is kind of the genesis of what happened way back that has now created this problem. I don't know if I believe that 100% or I don't, but it was made clear that the seed that was planted 20 to 25 years ago with respect to zoning is why we're here today. Again, I'm not sure I believe that 100%. And interestingly enough, one of the key components to that zoning, 1 acre zoning, was to save our water and keep our water clean.
Right.
That goal has not been attained by the zoning that was put into place. And I think, lastly, I'm not sure, and I've looked into this, I'm not sure I can agree wholly with the town stopping people from coming down and buying properties, because Richard Waystack made a very clear point that there's 23 properties in Harwich for sale, all starting at 500,000 and above. I don't know if those are even affordable to begin with. So some
At
of,
this point, they're not.
they're not. And what happened was the acceleration because of COVID to
Yeah.
our property values.
Right.
It's nothing to do with the town. It's nothing to do with the property owners who are selling. It's to do with supply and demand.
Oh,
I feel.
and I mean, 2008, since 2008, interest rates under 2%. With the perfect explosion of VRBO and Airbnb and, right, it's a perfect storm,
I'm
yes.
not even sure that the homes that we're talking about, that that are being torn down and then the big houses are being put up, I'm not even sure those houses were affordable to begin with, even for a teacher and a fireman at the same time. So that brings me to the point of I don't want to be aiming at, I don't want to be kind of aiming at the wrong target when we could be using our resources to really identify where we need to begin to do things differently, and that is at the town level. With the Marshline property is what I feel. It's
So-
there, we own it.
Hopefully,
Let's begin to develop.
hopefully we can dig into some of the data, and so, I mean, did you go, Jim? Or did
I
you-
didn't go, no, I
Oh.
just had a question, though.
Oh, sure, go ahead, because
Did-
we're gonna.
Did they talk about the interplay between, or among sewers and lot sizes, and which is zoning, and
Well,
affordability? Because it's
little.
all
Briefly.
intertwined,
It is all intertwined, it's a big puzzle. And I think, density will lead to, if we try to create 300 new places to live, that's 300 more places to live that are creating sewage and waste and the need for water. Aquifer is already stressed, our clean water is already an issue. There was a point about how sewering does not fix this problem. I disagree with that. I think sewering would help the
One step, yeah.
one step. It is a step in the right direction versus putting in more septic tanks. So to answer, I hope I answered your question.
Yep, definitely.
Any other big topics we missed from the housing huddle?
I just want to add, the purpose of it was really to do ideation rather than solution.
Right,
Right.
And
right,
that's why
right.
the session in March, and I
Right.
think the design of it was very good. It was to take this same group And I'm not sure, I don't know if it was Richard's idea or how it spawned, but I think they're going from town to town and having multiple sessions. And the hope is that you ideate across the towns so that hopefully you'll get enough ideas that towns can start to share and hopefully with critical mass begin to solve collectively.
We are not alone.
Oh, yeah.
No, that was
Yeah.
one of the
And
biggest
I think we will,
is
yeah.
that they're finally looking at it from a regional
So that
standpoint
felt good.
versus
That
town,
felt healthy.
each specific town, which they need to. I mean, realistically, in my opinion, they should have been looking at water and wastewater regionally also, but that's, that ship has sailed. But if they don't look at this regionally, then, we've gotten nowhere the way we are.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, my understanding, and it may have changed or morphed because I wasn't able to go, but my understanding was the goal was to educate people, and again, that was why I said, so why are you having it in the morning? Because you made that remark yourself when you asked me, can you go? And I'm like, I normally would be there, but I'd normally be right there in that building, but I wasn't able to. I said, I thought the idea was to educate and train people about how to go and advocate and how to go and speak to zoning boards of appeal and planning boards and their board of selectmen, so that people had the right talking points to help, move this along.
So
in
I
their
think it
towns.
was maybe a third that and
Okay.
2/3, let's start talking about ideas.
Well, that's
It took
great,
on a
no,
life of
that's
its
great.
own.
But
Yeah.
but they did.
Like,
at
like
least
something
have-
like that would.
They
when we
started
such
And
a-
that's
that
fine
way,
if
but
that's
didn't
what
get
they
very
wanted,
far.
but if they followed the lead of what the people there wanted, then
Maybe
that's
that'll be
better.
after the second session.
Yeah.
It took a little life of its own as well.
Thank you for going. And it's wonderful we had such representation from this committee. Yes.
I would argue that many solutions have already been identified. If you read the housing production plan from 2016.
We're gonna get there.
There's a lot of solutions that have not been implemented.
Yes, we're gonna get there.
We need to spend far less time on identifying the problem, which is getting worse,
Yeah,
but
Some of this,
it is on implementation.
as a point of transition, this, as Brian was saying, this may have been a little bit of consensus building too about just how bad the problem is. So thank you everyone for going. I really, really, really appreciate it. I think it's like key to our work. So go team. Thank you. Points 3 and 4 on our agenda: update on the RFP and discussion on including housing production plan and open space and recreation plan in our long-term local comprehensive plan are a bit related. So Paul regrets he can't be with us tonight. He's out. He had an elective thing. Going to be back working remotely next week. Gave us an update. He has a lovely draft of the RFP, which is, with the appropriate folks, with Mr. Powers and everything, in terms of we're moving forward on that. And thank you, all three of you, for participating in that. I mean, I did a little feedback. You guys all had the opportunity. I tweaked a little bit of language in terms of what our core values were and tweaked a little bit of that, which I think felt good. Margot or anybody, if you saw it last, if you want to weigh in sort of, and then we can kind of get everyone up to speed on what the strategy is, the idea behind including the an updated production plan and open space plan, because I think there's a little bit of nuance to that we should cover. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think that Paul did a really good job of creating a pretty simple and relatively short in its substantive sections. I mean, it's got a lot of procedural stuff in it,
Right.
but the substantive part of it's pretty short and focused. The discussion about the housing production plan and the open space and recreation plan came up because both of those plans were updated in like 2015, 2016, something like that. They're only good for 5 years, and so they are officially expired in terms of the way the state looks at them. And they're both important plans for the town to have in place in order for us to be able to access state funding for a variety of different things. So I had suggested to Paul that we include in the scope of work that, since we're going to have a section on housing anyway, and we're going to have a section on open space and recreation anyway, why not include a sort of standalone section that would serve to update those plans officially. And we had some back and forth discussion among the committee about that. And there's some concern that we may not have enough money to do all of that, although my gut feeling is that the plans that we have right now are actually pretty good. There's some data that needs to be updated, and I think we would need to go through a process to reevaluate, are these the right strategies? Are these still the things that we want to pursue? But it seems like it shouldn't be, I think, a really huge lift to try to update these plans and get them officially adopted so that they can then, be filed with the state, and we'll be back in the running. And that, we didn't talk about this, but I mean, that could conceivably be done earlier in the process of doing the LCP, rather than, waiting until the end when the whole document is completed, because it's I think likely that there will be a need for being able to apply for state grants in the meantime. So trying to sort of push that to the front of the process might not be a bad idea.
Is any other group working on that particular?
That's the part that we need to
So,
figure out.
yes, so as a layperson, my concern with this initially was, of course, intellectually this makes sense, right? As a layperson, or as a citizen, was a bit concerned initially, do we have the sort of political mandate to do that? And we are being slowly guided, from our colleagues in town hall, that this may be the way to proceed. And, it's easy to understand, well, that really is going to make sure it's really important that we, have the Board of Selectmen behind us in including that. It's really important that we have, the Recreation Committee, all the other stakeholders, which we've talked about extensively anyway, and that we would, of course, want them to be part of our local comprehensive plan. So it makes sense to, I think, include that work, but our bar of having to really have community buy-in is going to be high. So cautiously
Boards like the Recreation Board and the Board of Selectmen are really focusing on much more day-to-day, much more immediate stuff. What this committee is supposed to be doing is long-range planning. Paul and the planning department should be involved in that, and we should keep the lines of communication open, so the open space, so the Recreation Committee, for example, doesn't get its nose out of joint.
Right, because what are you doing planning? Yes.
They're gonna be happy to have somebody
Yes.
else doing the lifting, and
Right.
$200,000 is a pretty nice budget for a consultant.
I would
And
think
they can
so.
move their money and time around, so if we ask for these plans as standalone, and if the budgets come in too high, then somebody's gonna have to make some
I
adjustments.
think we can help too.
I think we are, as a committee, up to the task. I think we can, I think we can do it.
Has it gone out? I mean,
Not yet.
Okay.
So, the internal with Joe Powers and things like that is
do we have
being reviewed.
estimated departure?
I don't think, Paul, no. Paul has done a lovely job. He wants as much of it, he wants it to go out as much as we do. So I think we're moving along about as quickly as we can.
One last comment, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
With Paul, going back to our discussion, he did a wonderful job of talking about housing and different types of housing and issues that he has encountered off Cape.
Wonderful.
At the housing hub.
Wonderful.
That's good.
I mean, he talked about things that I don't think people had really heard about before, about pros and cons of different types of funding and different types of housing and stuff.
Wonderful.
He was really, really good. I was really impressed, so.
It's awesome. That's great. Wonderful. Thank you. Any other thoughts on the RFP or any, I talked to David, I talked to Margot, thank you, Ed, for participating in it all as well, about, the nuances here from both a professional planner perspective and then as a committee and as a citizen. Any other thoughts on that?
No, Margo. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
You know, having been part of the review committee, but not having gotten the document
That's where you
until
did, yeah.
way late, because I found out that Paul had my
Oh.
old town email address. But I want to thank Margot and David for hitting the points that needed to be hit in your review work, so thank you. By the time I got
Happy to
there,
do it.
it was sort of at the end.
Yeah, no, I think it's really strong. Go
On
ahead.
that, one other question.
Please.
Last meeting, I asked that if we could have a roster sent around.
Oh, goodness, I probably failed on that. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
I was just assuming that was another thing that was sent out to my.
No, I think I have your right address. You get my usual emails, like
Yeah,
my
I do,
reading
I do,
assignment and
yeah,
everything?
yeah.
We should
No,
send
I
a
wasn't
roster.
sure if you were gonna do that or Paul was gonna do it, or.
I forget.
You know.
That's as chair of the committee, I'll take responsibility for that. I'm sorry.
You know, it's interesting when you were talking about, instead of looking at ideas, but there are also ideas, I think, happening all over the country addressing some of these things. So, like one of us, or Paul, or somebody also needs to look at that stuff too, I think. I read
Right.
something about a really cool thing going on in by Vale or something, where there's a public-private, merging of
They did
doing stuff.
we had the fellow in Vale do a presentation
Oh, really?
by Zoom to the County Selectmen's Association on their program.
Interesting.
And it basically, what they're doing is buying rights that, on housing, that if you sell it, it has to be sold to somebody who's going to live there full-time. So it retains it in the local,
And they pay you off up front to,
as opposed to becoming.
to give up the potential appreciation.
Right.
I don't know if it works, but it sounded
It
interesting.
seems to be working, and it also has some interesting consequences. One of the concerns are keeping seniors in their housing, if they can sell that and have that extra money to maintain themselves in the community, and then conceivably leave the house to a grandchild who will move into the community and become part of the community on a full-time basis. Some of us worry about our children being able to afford to stay here, so.
Excellent. Thank you. So the last and meatiest part of our agenda here is to really dig into data about Harwich and about Cape Cod. And I sent out a reading list, and I really enjoyed it. I have to say I really kind of nerded out and enjoyed a lot of this stuff. And I was going to start, and I'm just to guide this. I really want to get all your feedback on this. I'm going to start with the Cape Cod Commission data, which I think last meeting we had a great visit with Chloe, as the planner from the Cape Cod Commission, and who really pointed us to talked about the local comprehensive planning process and how the commission is involved, and really, at least from my perspective, turned us to the data that the commission has gathered. So I wanted to kind of start with that, and then we'll
Sure, so
delve into some of the Harwich specific
Are
stuff.
we done with the prior topic, the production data, the Harwich data? Are we done with that, or that?
No, we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
So we talked
Okay, you went
talked
down.
about the talked about the RFP, and we talked about the pros and cons of including the housing production plan and the
Okay,
open
we
recreation.
didn't want to dive into that, okay.
Well,
Do we feel like we haven't covered it?
No, I didn't know if you wanted to go into the plan.
Not yet. I was going to cover it with the data. Thank you. We'll get to that, but, sorry, moving too
I
fast.
dove into what you sent.
Got it. Any other thoughts about that? Like I said, I think it just holds us to a higher bar, but I think we're up to the task.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to speak to Jim's point that the RFP actually is explicit in saying that we want the consultants to bring to the process creative ideas from from other places.
We specifically include that. That was not in the first, and that is something we had articulated very well as a committee, and I made sure that language is in there. That we both did, yep. Agreed.
So the consultant will be charged with pulling together this type of thing.
Yes, which Paul pointed out. I felt it was important, kind of, we're not going to belabor the point, but dig through some of this a little bit in terms of just kind of, so my point in talking about this is for us to really educate ourselves as a committee, we're all coming at this with different expertise, and try to look at what is some of the best data. Certainly data can be manipulated, but also the state of the reports, data is only as good as you collect it, kind of talk about what the Cape Cod Commission and Harwich knows about ourselves, and discuss this for a bit of time to see what sticks out to folks as a committee.
Yeah, another thought of that might be to formulate a few hypotheses that the consultant could dig into the data to test as well.
And I actually when I went through this Cape Cod Commission data, which, the website is very robust in terms of any question you might have. You can kind of come at that information, and I think it's a good thing to think about going forward as we come up with some ideas and strategies. Is it supported by the best information we have? Yeah.
There's one trend that kind of bothers me that I don't quite find in the data, and when I look at the population data in the housing plan,
Yeah.
My sense is that there's more, in fact, I see it in the field card analysis that I've done with the Harwich Fund, that there are more part-time residents than there are full-time residents.
So let's dig into this a little bit. I'm with you. So, and I'm just I don't want to belabor the point. I want people to be able to jump in. And this was just, I have put together a little bit in my own mind how to kind of talk about this at a bigger level. And then exactly to your point, Brian, like if things stuck out to you in your own reading as you approached it, please, let's put it out here. And we won't go on and on forever, but I think it's useful. So they put together 2021 in the height of COVID, second homeowner survey. They had 924 responses, which globally in a descriptive study is pretty well powered. 89% of these people were over 55, age over 55. 52% were retired. 60% had an income of over $150,000. Compared to, like, if you look at when we break it out, what's the average income in Harwich? Average versus median, I may screw that up, was about $70,000.
That's for the full-time resident. All those
Correct.
statistics-
So we're correct. We're comparing, right. So we're comparing second homeowners across Cape Cod to primary residents. So again, this is why we're marinating on this as a committee. 61% of these had a graduate or professional degrees, which when you actually compare, Harwich is very well educated amongst primary residents in the sense of very well educated. I can pull up those Harwich specifics overall, just, irrespective of income. Basically, 44% were saying that they're spending more time on the Cape because of the pandemic. 31% wanted to make this their primary residence. 8% were anticipating this, using this as a short-term rental. About a quarter had previously owned property on the Cape. And of that quarter, many for a long time, over 25 years. But interesting, so it doesn't tell you this directly, but you can kind of infer 75% were then new Cape homeowners. So if you then go to Harwich, to your point, Brian, and the internet is a little bit slow, so I'm sorry if this is a little clunky. But I wanted to pull up the year-round population. Of Harwich, and anyone can jump in if there's something about demographics or something that hung out
One
for
thing I
them.
mentioned is that,
Okay.
35% of our folks are 65 and older.
Yes.
That's going to double in the next 10 years, and it's going to increase even more among people 75 years old and over. So it's
As best
meanwhile,
our
the rest of the population
yes,
is gonna
as
tell you
best
that.
as our statistics can guess. So I looked at the Harwich was expected actually to not grow, like based on the 2016 data, and our population has exceeded that. So we have grown more than we thought. I would put Harwich there if I could, but you can see it. You can see the internet grinding a little bit here. I may switch over to the hotspot if someone wants to.
Well, it's interesting that yours isn't working, as I said.
So,
Is
It's been
yours,
good.
is anybody else's reasonably fast? Maybe
Yeah,
they want to
mine-
project?
Yeah, well, I don't know about projecting, that probably takes
Oh.
up more.
Yeah,
Was that unbelievable?
I had heard that.
What are you guys saying over there? Share with us why I'm trying to make the internet
I
work.
think at the housing huddle, they mentioned that 48% of the workers on Cape Cod have to come from.
Yes,
Cape Cod.
yes,
Yeah.
this is here
Had to
too.
drive.
Yes,
From 24 to
across the
48.
bridge.
48.
I
Yep.
asked her for the 2 data points, and she wasn't sure when it was 24.
Well, they say it's 100% in Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. Everybody comes across on the ferry, they say.
Scary.
It's unsustainable.
No, it's not.
Unsustainable.
And they say if you go down to the Hamptons, apparently, you can't get to the Hamptons any day of the week because there's one road in and it's so crowded with workers coming from the middle of Long
I
Island.
just thought that was
It's a-
staggering.
yeah, You have to address these things or it ruins the life of everybody. You know?
Caleb, could I borrow you for a second? Is there any wisdom to making the internet work? For me, to actually project?
Think about it. That went fast.
Is Caleb over there?
yeah,
And we just got the bridges shot down.
Does he have earphones on or something?
Oh,
That-
is Caleb there? He may
no,
not.
he isn't.
Oh,
He's very quiet.
It is slow.
oh, is there a different internet I could get on, Caleb?
I can get off it and see if that helps you.
The secure town hall,
Do you think that would be faster?
I'll get off it and use my own phone.
Let me see if I can get, I'm sorry, but you see this is not
Keep on
working.
that It's interesting, you look at the Chatham numbers and the percentage of part-time residents is even, really much higher than.
All right, so is it the TOH internet?
that is it, yep.
All right, and I'm gonna connect. I don't want to yell out any password or anything. Recorded on the meeting for all of the town of Harwich to know. Let's see if I can,
Jump on.
let's see if I can get it in.
Well, the cost of the
Um,
parking lot.
It's thinking about it, I think, changing network requirements. So the other thing I wanted to get to, which we're a little bit slow in showing, is there's readily available water reports here and watershed reports. And I'll put a little bit of my bias, but I wanted to like open it up to discussion. Oh, we're connected. Let's see. Yes, all right, let's talk about Harwich demographic data then here. Hold that point.
So,
It seems like I'm in, but TOH, internet access. Harwich. It's going. Very slowly. Okay, so I think, here we are in Harwich. So 94% of us are white. To the age group around this, we've got, you can see that breakdown. This was impressive to me, high rate of education. 20, 40, 60% are showing college and above. So that's who we are. It is, when you look at, I don't want to bore everyone about this, but if you actually look in school enrollment by town, we have incredibly diverse schools racially. Economically, they also mark out vulnerable populations, and that is based by basically income and address. That heats more or maps more to Barnstable and Yarmouth. There's one small area in Harwich. They also mapped out sort of environmental justice populations, which I thought was like an interesting concept to think about, like what percentage of residents are potentially vulnerable to, rising seawater or that kind of thing. So that's the concept of environmental justice. That was, talking about it that way was relatively new to me, so I think that's a language thing we should be talking to have, as part of our vocabulary. I do want to show you here the watershed issue, because that is pretty readily available, and it goes to the housing discussion, if it comes up. So you can look by nitrogen load, you can look by the different watersheds and how we're doing. And to some of the discussion point of there is a bit of a mismatch anecdotally to where building has gone on and watershed issues. So this is one of them. Let's see. Leave meeting. No, we're staying on. Still very slow. Wait.
Interesting.
I can't show it to you. Well, let's see. So in the specific watershed about Harwich and the Herring River, that's an area I happen to know well, but someone could weigh in about Pleasant Bay or things like that. The most 2016, the sort of sewering plans and watershed plans were pretty aggressive in that area based on the nitrogen loads, and then this is just described, and yet there's also been a lot of building there. So just kind of underscoring that disconnect that we can't necessarily fix, but talking about in terms of planning around that. And so this is, an update 2021 of the town-approved funding, the grant funding, and then talking about these areas. And if you're interested in, you can break it down to then very specific, like Pleasant Bay, Herring River, how does that connect to Dennis? What are they doing? So my point in this is sort of any question that we have that's going to come up, particularly your subject matter area, I think there's a lot available to us here to sort of make that case. Is there anything that I kind of raised my points about that?
So,
Go ahead.
the point that was made on the aging of our population and how that aging will be double in the coming years, I've been involved in a number of communities on the other coast that were aging communities, and as the population, the older cohort gets older and larger, the community sets itself up for an eventual population collapse.
Right,
Because
So
all of a sudden-
it's happening in China.
well, and I would argue it's already starting to happen here. My wife, who works for a law that does entirely estate and probate work, the number of probates she's trying to manage has tripled over the last 5 years.
That's an interesting metric. Yeah, secondary metric of, yeah.
Whereas, 5 years ago, she'd maybe at any one time have 2 or 3 probates that she was trying to get through the system. She's now juggling 12 and 15, and it's quite honestly driving her nuts.
Yeah, we love older people, but in terms of a vibrant community, right, you need sort of all age populations. Yeah. Other things that stuck out to folks about the Cape Cod Commission data before we move on to some of the other data that's available to us.
Well, I think one of the things that I think we need to connect the dots on are what do we know environmentally from the commission data or other sources, and what's happening with the update of the town's wastewater plan.
Which was specifically thought to be outside of our scope, but in terms of us participating in that planning, but incredibly important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
right.
just, yeah, I mean, when you're thinking about, nutrient loading in various different watersheds and so forth, I mean, that's pivotal. I mean, that's probably the most important thing that's happening in town around that. So
Mhm.
we need to be educated about it, I guess is the point that I'm making.
Definitely.
And one of the things you brought up was the disconnect between where housing is being located and the environmental impacts, especially on wastewater.
And this is secondary home housing, but just in the sense of yeah.
But, one of the things that, looking at Harwich's history, I mean, every town was offered in the late 70s, early 80s to establish a sewering system and apply for federal and state funding, which was fairly substantial back then. And most towns on the Cape didn't, and relied on future growth to be served by septic systems, which means as the subdivisions were developed, there was no consideration of putting in a sewer system. So now retrofitting that sewer system is just simply on the street layout is tough for the public side, but on the private side, virtually every septic system is in the backyard, which increases substantially the cost for the homeowner to hook up to the eventual sewer system. I mean, we sort of shot ourselves in the foot on multiple levels. But
I'm also cautiously optimistic, though, about Harwich. I thought about that coming in here, actually, tonight, in terms of there's so much that's correct with our community. But I wanted to show you, so any more insight that anyone got from poking around the commission? It's all there. It's amazing, amazing, amazing resource. Amazing. Okay. Then transitioning a bit about statewide guidance. It's all readable to you. The Mass Housing Production Plan guidance and the Mass Rec and Open Space Plan guidance is quite lovely, and obviously our planner will help us with that. But the point that impressed me was how inclusive the language was, particularly in the housing production. How do you do a housing production plan? How inclusive the language was in terms of empowering towns to make appropriate decisions for themselves. And that was almost like very specifically like, hey, Cape Cod, or we're not the only vulnerable area, but hey, Gloucester, or hey, downtown New Bedford or something like that. You are a historically important place, and and here are some guidelines around housing. So I think we'll find ourselves kind of coming back to these state guidelines in terms of being empowered locally. That's also here, and I think we'll come back to this language a bit with the help of the planner and the consultant.
One of the things in our housing production plan that there's an analysis that isn't there is to the extent at which the available programs and grant funding actually serves us meeting our basically housing issues, because most of the programs will help out in housing of sort of lower income, but the middle income folks that need help, it doesn't really do much for. And there doesn't seem to be any motion forward at the state level to develop some robust programs to do that, which then raises the question, sort of absent looking for assistance from state and federal sources. What is it that, what are the sort of strategies we locally can develop to take care of our housing need?
Which is an excellent transition to our own current, though technically expired, housing production plan that was in 2016, which I am going to open. If you just want to follow along on your faster computers, if your internet is better than whatever, if you're getting the better internet than me, the Harwich Housing Production Plan, 2016. So David had pointed out that a lot of this is very good when you actually read it. It's the trouble of how do you do it? But I think you'll find, I really found the language very refreshing, very grounded, for lack of a better word, very accurate, very comprehensive. Certainly the data, needs to be updated, but it wasn't so different in 2016. The same pressures, just
These plans should be updated every 10 years, not every 5 years.
maybe a little different.
In concert with the LCP.
But is the total population here full-time or part-time, or what is the population?
So 13.5 is what we're going with right now, and it was thought to be, at last census, 13.5.
Is
13,500 ballpark.
full-time?
Full-time.
Or
13
at least 6 months in a day. But
Okay, got it, 13 in a day.
it's harder to pin the summer population, but some estimates are around 35,000.
Understood.
Double.
But the intent is 13 in a day.
13.5. And my point in saying it was the last projection, when this was projected, it was supposed to be like 12.8 or whatever. So COVID, we've gained maybe a few more.
But if the dynamic is more houses are being bought by people that are part-timers, I guess that explains. That's why it's more flat from a population growth standpoint. There's more houses are turning over to people that are part-time residents. I'm
So-
just trying to understand the dynamic of why the population over a 10-year period is flat.
It's messy because, maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, seasonal houses were used in the summer, and they were pretty much not used in the winter. And now the use patterns are so different. People come back and forth for weeks at a time in the off-season, or back and forth on weekends, or, they're being used in a way that year-round number, I guess that's, if you're here on the day that the census goes around and knocks on doors, you're an official year-round resident. But it's, in terms of demand for services and all of that sort of thing, it's a hard number to really nail down.
So looking at some of this in our 2016 housing report, there's thought to be a decrease in children overall. And those 65 and older will be 42% of residents by 2030. That's the last sort of, projection around that data. I think what the commission descriptive reports are starting to describe as well is loss of what were previously year-round rentals to a seasonal rental economy. And that's sort of nuanced in the sense of, I'm comfortable saying, back in the 80s, local people who owned the home often was reasonably common to rent your house, make a bunch of money for a couple weeks, go camp at Nickerson. That was the thing. That's what a lot of locals did. Camp at Nickerson and make a nice chunk of change that helped you get through the winter, right? And that is different now. You may not own the house, you may be getting kicked out of the house, or the pressure is to rent it so hard in the summer from June through August or through September that isn't a viable rental anymore, right?
And to what Margot mentioned a long time ago, the seasonal owners would mostly just use it for part of the summer, and then you had the dreaded winter rental, but it filled a niche. sometimes it helped in education at least, because you could rent it after Labor Day, but you usually had to be out by May 31st. And there was that scramble for where am I gonna go for the summer, unless you had somewhere else to go this summer. And nobody ever really loved a winter rental, but those don't exist.
Yeah,
Those starter homes, those
Yeah.
are things people are like, what's that?
yeah.
I've never even heard of it anymore.
So to this report, 2016, which again, just kind of helps us, we're not reinventing the wheel. Harwich Housing Production Plan, page 4, yes, the internet is working. Declines in rental occupancy, seasonal rental pressures, predominance of single-family homes, rising housing costs, lower housing density, right? So all of this was here. So, and this is just kind of adding fodder to what we understand descriptively living here in the community, and to the point of including an updated version plan of this in our long-term comprehensive plan. I think this is very doable, so it sort of supports the strategy of including
I
that.
think
Question,
one,
did the pandemic speed any of this up?
Yeah.
so I think one more category that stands alone that'll probably have to be addressed in there is the short-term rental.
Right, and how,
The business of that, and, you know.
and descriptively, we hear that, right? No one lives in my neighborhood. Like, I look out and there are 4 or 5, this has
Me
not
too.
been my experience, but I look out and I'm just
I do.
saying, the proverbial person, 4 or 5 people here, there's 4 or 5 houses and no one's in them, and I don't know who owns them. And in a town as vibrant and resilient as Harwich, is that where we want to head? Probably not. Is there anything we can do about that?
And there is still, I don't know anything about the ownership these days, but there is still a substantial stock of smallish houses. This gets to what Barbara was talking about earlier on, that could become, a subsidized stock of affordable housing. If we got creative about how to acquire or provide subsidies to make those, permanently affordable. So, that stock still exists, I guess is the point. We've lost some of it to trophy homes, but there's still a lot of it. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of that as a resource.
And one of the things we all know it, but as we participate in this whole process, we'll have to be very precise about the language we use. Is there specific terms around this housing? Big A, as David was saying, big A affordable housing is different than perhaps the other strategies we're talking about in terms of little a affordable housing. Yes.
So when we speak of stock, through my digging over the last couple of weeks, I found that there are some affordable housing units that are at risk of coming off Harwich's shy list, subsidized housing inventory. And I would love to know what our town has to do to make sure that that doesn't happen, because if we go from 5.5% to 4% because we lose X number of
Right.
houses or units on the subsidized housing inventory, that is a very bad thing to have happen.
Yep, we're
And
already,
we
prices.
already have them,
Right.
Yeah.
and I think we're, again, aiming sometimes at the wrong target with how are we gonna get more, Well, let's also make sure that we take care of what we have. And digging through this, I believe it's page 56.
Of the Harwich plan?
Yeah, I mean,
Cool.
this.
I know it's a dense document, right?
Well, it says the affordable restrictions for phases 1 and 2 are due to expire in 2018. Now, that leads me to believe, that led me to do a little more digging, and I found out that our town is actually in negotiations right now to keep off of Oak Street by the high school and Cranberry Valley, that housing complex in there.
Pine Oaks too?
Pine Oaks too.
Yeah.
We are in the process of potentially losing stock in there. And there's a negotiation going on about how to keep that stock on our shy list. And I think that's a ball that's been dropped, and I'd like to understand better I don't know, Ed, do you have any insight? Like, I'd love to know how to keep them on.
How does it go off?
Well,
How does it go off?
How does it go
well,
off?
Pine Oaks, there's 3 units, 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2 are down on Bank Street.
Right.
Sure.
Bank Street, and Pine Oaks 3 is the one up the other side of the high school. All 3 of them are owned by Mid-Church,
Church
Mhm.
homes,
Mid-Cape Church
Mid-Cape
Homes,
church homes.
which their sole mission is to provide housing. So,
So it's a NGO or a nonprofit?
yeah.
Okay.
They're also negotiating for property to bring another large number of affordable housing available in town. I can't see that they're going to, that's gonna be a hard set of negotiations to keep their existing stock affordable, given that's their purpose in life. The one group of housing that we did lose.
Is it a zone, is it like a town permitting issue, or what's the?
No, when they built the things, they got a variety of public funding, and they had to commit, part of the thing, you had to deed restrict your property to a certain amount of years of affordability, and they did it,
And it's expired, but
It's
you would
expired.
anticipate that they will keep that
Yeah,
going, is what you're
yeah,
saying?
Yeah. The one group of housing that slipped off well, it's sort of funny. It was on the list, and I think it's still on the list, even though all of the restrictions have gone by the wayside, is the Queen's Court up
In
past the
Innsbruck.
dump.
Oh.
It says it doesn't
No.
expire until
I
2030.
don't know much about that.
2030, Bernadette's saying?
That's what it says in the.
Where's
in
that?
This area.
Well, I know a number of the houses slipped through and are now market value because nobody was sort of
On top of it.
on top of it when they came up for sale. So,
What is the story also, or the use of that, the motel that was turned into a summer
Right, which they
housing?
talk about this just to kind of ground this in the stuff that we're talking about, motel conversion strategies.
well, that was Stonehorse, and that was
Yeah, the old stone.
that was a good. Well, one of the buildings went up in flames, and they took down some of the other buildings and then built what's there now, and it's set up to be essentially dormitories.
And is that empty all winter then?
No.
No,
No.
they're less. There's obviously quite a bit less occupancy in it during the winter.
But they're there year-round.
Huh?
But that's
You
owned
need-
by
you're-
Chatham Bars Inn and dedicated to their own housing. Isn't
No.
that a private thing?
No,
I don't
it's
think
owned
that
by-
one is.
it's
They're-
owned
I've
by,
heard they're
uh,
It's
trying to buy
developed by
all of it.
Rudnick and a few other people, and they contract out for certain numbers of rooms to some of the larger
Zudi.
employees.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so for like J1
Yeah, right.
transfers, they'll
Yes,
basically
and
say,
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
commit to 5 slots
Yeah.
for us, and whether you get those 5 slots or not, you're paying the bill.
Yeah.
Is that something that ought to be replicated, or is there a role for more?
He's
more-
thinking over there.
Well,
He's thinking.
I gotta work on different
I
All right.
always have this fantasy of setting up a tent cabin camp in the woods, because growing up working in the national parks, that's what I lived in all summer.
The world's changed.
So, before we get.
I'm sorry,
no,
excuse
g-
my ignorance. So what we're saying is that there are groups that own housing that's on our affordable housing stock, and they only have a certain time commitment, and when they roll off of that time commitment, that's where we might lose them, and they
Yep.
could charge market value or whatever.
Or tear them down and build
Or tear 'em.
huge houses.
The deed restriction lifts, and then
And
it's,
how long does that usually last?
depends on what it was
It's
issued for.
another interpretation.
and what's the incentive to stay on?
Right.
What's, like.
They're a nonprofit,
Well, outside of that, a private.
Besides the
element.
church group.
helping people.
Well, yeah, and, some of it's owned by, some of the housing's owned by Hesh. housing.
Habitat.
And others is owned by CD, Community Development Partnership, or HAC. You know, that's their mission, is to do it, but.
Well, heck, Habitat, it's owned, the deeds go to
Yeah.
people, but it's
Right.
deed restricted.
Yeah.
But my naive thing is if we've done it in 3 places there, why can't we use that as a model and do it in 10 more places?
Gonna
It's pretty
see.
nice housing, you know.
So we're covering housing before, because we're doing other planning things, and then we're gonna be winding up, I think. Any other data points, nuances, insights from anyone else's perspective around housing or population?
I just think going back to the aging population piece and going back to wealth transfer and what that means for Harwich, but also Massachusetts at large. We've got about $68 trillion in the next 10 to 15 years that's going to be transferred from the baby boomer generation down. I think we just need to look at some of this stuff from a macro perspective and what that wealth transfer to the younger generations is going to mean in terms of their ability to buy, sell, transfer some of that wealth, because a lot of it's tied up in real estate. So I'm wondering, what does that look like at our current state, and how many of those folks within the family that might inherit these estates are going to either just, sell the house, move to the Cape, whatever it may be. We want to create an incentive around why living in Harwich is great for these young families. And so especially with that wealth transfer happening, I just think from a macro perspective, we have to start thinking about that stuff as we commit to plans and
I'm gonna
figure
spend
things
it
out.
all.
Yeah, if I was them, I'd spend it all.
It's interesting, though, I sort of get pulled in to help people sometimes, and
That's
it's,
check bouncing.
it's amazing how many people have no money, but they have $1 million house they're living
Yeah.
in. And that can really save them, as they move to the
Yeah.
last
But
part
not
of life.
always.
But not
The
always.
house can be paid off and
Mhm.
through your estate, and your children can still maybe not afford the taxes. to live
Correct.
In your
Yeah,
house.
that's right.
We expect that's.
It's very unpredictable. Very
Yeah,
unpredictable,
That's-
right?
and so-
It's so hard to predict.
to that point, it's like, what are the factors and mechanisms that are going to be put in place where there's still going to be a big tax bill
Right.
for somebody to pay? And
Yeah.
usually, if it's a family of multiple people, they're either going to decide to settle that in-house, keep the house,
Yeah.
or they're going to say, you know what, it's not worth it, let's put it on the market, sell it, get as much as we can and pay off what we owe. So it's just something to think about as we,
I think it's a very
progress through here.
I think, go ahead, Brian.
Ed, I mean, not only from the macro standpoint, but how does it change the dynamics of the community?
Sure.
Imagine
Yeah.
some of those children inheriting the asset that's sitting in Harwich.
Mhm.
And what does it do to the changeover and changing the dynamics of our community?
More Airbnbs.
Right, I mean, and this is what we're trying to figure out, is how do you maintain and encourage a vibrant community?
Rent it out,
Yes,
make some
yes.
money on it.
So
Absolutely.
to that end, I think we are all on the same page that we are digging in on housing, and we're gonna be on it officially, yes. The rec and open space, I think, is a little less controversial, though in the housing plan, it actually does suggest that those two plans be related, which I think is interesting, and your open space plan considering housing. And then just being respectful of the time, because I think we've accomplished a lot in terms of chewing on some things. Other parts of our plan, because it's not just about housing, though housing is a big deal, and water is a big deal, and our resources is a big deal, and how those two connect, right? With everything we've talked about, zoning, permitting, everything, zoning, housing, water. I think we all got that there's a lot of disconnect there, and hopefully our plan is gonna connect those. Other things in our plan, topics, anything open that you pulled some sense out, some numbers about? Jeff?
So, thank you. And I'll make it quick. After meeting with Elaine Shovlin from Real Estate and Open Space, it was shocking to me. I thought I knew what they did. Really what they do, as you got from my little narrative, is they identify properties that could be utilized for the improvement of the town of Harwich as a whole. And whether that's finding properties that could be for housing, but more importantly, getting these properties back on the tax roll. And that, it's a revenue generating committee, this group. And I was so impressed with Elaine and how deep she goes into this with our Board of Selectmen, that it was refreshing to know, for me, that somebody is looking out for this part of Harwich.
Cool.
And yeah, I think she does such an amazing job. So that's all I have to say. But I think that needs to be, like you mentioned, they need to work together, the real estate and open space and the housing production. Absolutely. They can identify the properties.
It's interesting that I sit on that committee, and the Harwich is unusual in that the scope, the mission of that committee is broader than it is in most towns. Most towns had their open space committee set up when the land bank was created, and their focus has been open space. But the Harwich committee was actually created before the land bank, and it was created with a broader mission. And so it does look at other public needs. Yeah. And the work that you were describing, Jeff, was, we were looking, Harwich has a really unusual amount of owners unknown and tax title land. And so we did a pretty in-depth analysis of that to try to identify where they were, what the priorities might be, and so forth. And my little mantra that we've given to the selectmen, and there has been some follow-through on it, but I think there's a lot more that could be done, is that the town could really, if it's proactive in really going after some of these lands, we can shape what happens with future growth in town.
Absolutely.
It's not just saying these are the rules and this is the zoning. You can, if you own it, you can actually decide this is where we're going to put some housing, and this is where we want to, protect natural resources. And some of these properties are, they've been sitting there for a long time, and some of them have, cloudy title. It's messy to try to go after them. But it's a huge opportunity for the town. And
Would you share the amount of money in the last year that this committee has generated in tax dollars? I heard it was 1.1 million.
yeah, it's over $1 million,
That is
trying to get
absolutely
some properties back on the rolls, yeah.
That's a sales contest right there. I like that.
What'd you say?
That's a sales contest right there. That's good. You guys are all going to Mexico.
That's really, really spectacular. I was happy to talk to Elaine.
Yeah, Elaine's great.
Yeah.
If you're looking for other topics, that we should, we talk about housing a lot, but.
Well, I'm just
There
trying
are
to,
others,
it's all related,
remember,
but just trying to keep our focus,
I mean, on my list, climate change, what should we be doing
Yes.
as a town?
Well, which this is to, go ahead. Go
And
ahead.
then the whole recreation amenities thing, there are more kids that probably need help, there are more seniors that need things to do. So I don't think it's a huge issue, but we should have a plan for amenities and parks and all that stuff. And then, conservation, we talked about this at the very beginning of how there's something special about Harwich, and we want to make sure we don't lose that in all this other stuff we do. And so, making sure we, keep the really special places special should be some plan we come up with.
Yeah, poking around the Cape Cod Commission website, what I was going to agree with about that was, in that survey of new to Cape Cod, new home or whatever, homeowners on Cape Cod, why are you coming to Cape Cod? It was for a chance to be outdoors, open space, and chance to be by the water, which is interesting.
And culture, if I
Yes.
can put my other hat
Yes.
for a
True.
moment.
Yes.
If you
Yes.
don't know,
That's true.
after 5 long years,
Congratulations.
we did last week, the Mass Cultural Council's Board of Governance voted 2 cultural districts.
It's like one of the only few towns in the
So,
state to have
well,
2.
Only 4 in the
Yes,
state.
yes.
And
To have
the only
2
one in
areas.
the state that has a director of cultural affairs, and that plays to the economy too, because that's,
Yes.
the Cape as a whole is very rich in arts and culture and makes it attractive for us, and the cultural economy is another thing that will help us. And it's still, as was said the other night, it's still the whole 7 villages of Harwich, it's culture everywhere in town, but we do have those 2 distinct cultural districts now, at long last. And that opens us up to a lot of grant opportunities for things there too, and it kind of goes hand in hand with open space, recreation, you know,
Amenities.
all those amenities.
Congratulations, it's a
Yeah,
huge,
that's
huge
Well, I
achievement.
just,
Yeah.
like I said, I just passed the baton from this one to that one. No,
I
I
mean,
did.
I think it
inherited my-
it goes to the heart of what we're
To the heart
doing,
of
and
what
I
was
think
done.
why housing and water is on the top of, we're on, I think, the right path here, that like, if you're able to have shelter here and have clean water, then maybe this would be a good place to live, right? That's kind of like I mean,
I don't
there's,
think anybody argues with that. If they can
yeah,
afford to
different
live
ways of talking about that, but like basic human
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
there's like,
Maslow's hierarchy.
yes,
You gotta
hierarchy
settle
of
that.
needs.
I am starting to see
Yes.
the cover slide coming together.
Yes,
Just
right.
a pyramid.
Yes, so,
need this.
and I'm beating this home is that
Housing
it's,
says-
it's not we're excluding other things, but there's a reason we're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
this stuff
No,
so much.
that's why we keep coming back to housing,
Yes,
because who wouldn't want to live here?
yes, yes,
But who can't afford to?
yes. And you have young people and you have old people and people of all sorts if you're able to live here and have clean water. Somebody was gonna say something down here.
Well, I was gonna say exactly what Bernadette just said. I just, has everybody noticed that the two cultural centers were just together?
It's awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. And to stay positive and why we're all doing this is I mean, even on there was a tragedy in terms of a fire in Orleans and a loss of a student at Harwich Elementary School, and to see how strong and how intact our community is around something like that is just, this is why we're doing this. It's an amazing, amazing place. Any other stuff we haven't covered around the data number? Do we feel like we're educating ourselves?
You- There's an interesting comment you mentioned about environmental justice and about sea level rise.
Yeah.
And Harwich is unusual because the sector of the population that's most acceptable to sea level rise tends to be the wealthiest.
That's right.
Well, I call that.
They didn't frame it that way. So no. And I kind of thought about that too. Well, that's why it was a nuanced point to me, because that's not how the commission is framing it, and it's not how they map it.
Yeah.
It has to do with like storm surge and inland marshes. I'm going to mangle some of the environmental, but higher marshes. It's not, yes, wetlands and
Yeah.
basically like water in your basement, kind of, that kind of situation,
Yeah.
as opposed to like my house washed away. Okay. Anything else anyone wants to add before we conclude?
This is just sort of bookmarking for future discussion, but I think one of the trickier things, there's been a lot of discussion recently in town about sort of who's on first with housing. And we have several groups that are official housing groups, and we're sort of adding ourselves to that mix.
Well,
So I think we need to figure out a strategy for how to approach this. So we're not stepping on anybody's toes, but that there's actually some leadership around this.
So my sense, because I thought a lot about this in the last 2 weeks, because I was kind of like, huh? Initially, though I get it, and I think we're right on the right path. Delicately, I think right now, and it seems like we're kind of putting it out there with the RFP and testing the waters, and but all the more our community and our whole process of this with the.
I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but it might make sense for you as the chairman to contact the chairman of the other housing groups to say that this group recognizes that as being, one of the most important things that we need to look at in the local comprehensive plan update, and that we're going to include it in our scope of work, and so that they don't hear it from somebody
Right.
else, they hear it directly from us.
Right.
And we should be learning from them and
Yeah.
sort of,
And not reinvent the wheel.
yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
It's delicate. It's delicate.
It is
It's delicate. I think we're up for the task and whatever that may look like, but I think it's delicate,
But
right?
we're taking a long-range perspective, and we need to coordinate with them. But our perspective is not the immediate, that's theirs. Then just take it from there. I think that's the right angle.
I'm sort of approaching, and if anything changes, I will let you know. I'm sort of, the RFP is sort of sitting there. kind of, you know, see what the response is and.
There shouldn't be anything in Paul's latest draft that would prevent it from going out. It's fine, it doesn't threaten any of the others, it's just a matter of making sure it happens. And I
Right,
think
because-
you and Paul checking in with town administration, I could probably keep moving it along.
Right.
It's ready to go.
The budget was presented last night, and that's his first priority, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, other things are getting in the
He was
way.
at another meeting with us today, and he said that, and he said, you know, now he can move forward on stuff, but that is his number one
Just tell Paul
priority,
to
and
keep
he
pushing.
did it a week early, so I heard that and said, hopefully that means,
We are nothing if tenacious as a committee.
Do we have a stated goal for when the consultant will be starting?
Paul's going to adjust the timeline. You know, it was fairly aggressive, like,
It was already supposed to go out.
yeah.
I know
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
I just
yeah,
wondered if we-
yes,
if we-
yes.
well,
But to that end, you know, there was mentioned earlier, if we have smaller chunks, like, even though this is a multi-year extravaganza, which I think we're understanding why now, that like there may be smaller chunks of, you know, the housing production plan or the rec plan that we may be able to accomplish as smaller wins. To that end, I am actually going to be in Rwanda in April, so we will revisit about teaching and operating and with the American College of Surgeons. So we will I'll regroup with Jeff in terms of running the meeting and the agenda and the
He'll dial in from Rwanda.
time.
she can't even get a computer to work. Not her problem, but her connectivity is so bad.
Adam, you never know.
Surprisingly,
I don't
Rwanda's
think it's
internet.
you. I think your computer will not work. I don't know. So I don't think we can get her to
Wow, Bernadette, punchy from the side.
Hey, I'm gonna hook you up with a Starlink, you'll be fine. We'll
computer
get
that
you in there.
can't do it. I don't think you can.
Yeah.
You know how we will do it.
So we'll double back. Hopefully, you know, the RFP will have gone out by then. We'll organize on the internet, you know, we'll organize on email about what our agenda is and what is our next piece of work because it keeps unfolding in front of us. I'm sure Jeff will run the meeting and it'll be great. So any other business that we didn't cover?
We're set for March 7th, right?
Yeah, but we have March 7th, right? You're saying April.
March 7th, I'm sorry. I'm off by my month. I was pausing that. Yes, next meeting is Tuesday, March 7th, and I will not be here.
Oh, that's the one you won't be here.
That's what you.
Correct, excuse
Oh, I
me.
see. You said March.
I'm sorry, I said April. Tuesday, March 7th, I will be in Rwanda. That is the next meeting. It's exactly,
Getting the arm ready.
it's exactly 1 month.
Got
See
the
if you can get
gavel?
your internet to work. Exactly 1 month from now. Do we have any other new business before we degenerate here? Can we get a motion to adjourn? A second? Any discussion? We have a vote to adjourn. All in favor? Any opposed?
Very good meeting.